Hello, hello, people. Oh my, look at my hair. Look at my face now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new stream in English. And well, I won't talk a lot because I really want to have. Hey, how are you, Oscar? Um, we have a lot of things to talk right now, like a lot of things. So let's, man, my my desktop is a mess. I will bring our special guest to screen today. Let's see if this works. Oh
Ah,
yeah. Hey,
there I am.
how are you? Oh
I'm
man,
good. What's up?
I thought I saw like a video of you like 1 month ago, and you had really long hair and really long beard. Have you shaved or something? Like with Oh man, no, I didn't expect that. You are for like a plus bell or something like an app.
Yeah,
I don't.
I
I don't have too much hair, but it was
yeah.
like a really big change. Okay,
We're
well,
like upside down versions of each other. You got the hair here, and I've got
yeah, but for me, every time that my beard grows, my hair starts like falling, and it doesn't grow again. But okay, Rich. Well, first of all, really thanks for being here. People already knows you, but do you want to tell people that doesn't know you who you are? Who is Rich Harris?
Sure, I'll try. I work at Vercel, just like you. Been there since November, which is what, 3 months?
Three
Um,
months.
yeah.
Oh man.
Prior to that, I worked at the New York Times, and people in the JavaScript web world, if they've heard of me, it's usually because of either Rollup, which is a module bundler, or Svelte, which is what I work on at Vercel.
Yeah. And I really didn't know that you created Rollup until like last week when I started looking at. And you already created like not just Rollup and Svelte, but another tools that probably are not so popular as Svelte and Rollup. Um, and you also have like a past working in design, right? You
I'm no, I'm not much of a designer, but I have worked on a graphics desk for
that's not designer, graphic
y-
desk.
yeah, and so like I've spent most of my career surrounded by really good designers, and like I've picked up just enough that I can make things look not terrible.
Yeah, as most of front end developers. Uh,
Yeah.
and right now you are working at Vercel, but doing Svelte. And what are the things you are working on right now? Like if the things that you can talk about, of course, right?
Yeah. But right now, all of my time is spent on SvelteKit, which is uh, like as React is to Next.js, Svelte is to SvelteKit. It's like a full stack ish framework for building Svelte apps. Got to be careful about using the word full stack because like the Rails people will get mad at you because they're like, "Where's the database?" Which is actually like a perfectly good question.
Those
It's
Ruby people. Yeah.
yeah, I mean they make a good point actually. Like we haven't like as a like the JavaScript development world in general hasn't really figured out how to make fully self-contained full stack apps. The way that like people figured out a decade ago. Because we're all like tinkering at the edge and like you've got to I don't know, we just haven't really figured out that part of
Yeah. We still
the
have
thing yet.
time. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're getting there. So that's what I'm working on. I'm working on SvelteKit. We're trying to get a stable release of that out in the next few weeks. Like not making any promises about when exactly, but like we're you know we're trying to make that happen sooner rather than later. And that is more than enough work to occupy all of my all of my time at the moment.
Yeah, we have used SvelteKit like 2 weeks ago. We created on a live stream on YouTube a Wordle clone. Like I have used Svelte in small projects, like to try it out. And I really like a lot of things about Svelte. It's like you create a project and you already have everything set up. Like you have the prettier and sleek configuration. You have all the things you have in Svelte. You have like I call it API routes. I don't know if it's the correct name for them.
Yeah, we call them endpoints, but it's the same concept.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw there's a question here from Domatag. Like, can you explain what Socket is without reference to other technologies? Which is like a good question, because we always say it's like Next but for Svelte, which is kind of circular. The point is that like you can have a component framework which allows you to build like a self-contained widget, like an atomic part of your user interface. But if you want to build an entire application, then you've got to have something that is going to do your server-side rendering, and you've got to have like a build process that is going to do your code splitting, so that you're not shipping your entire application as a big fat JavaScript bundle. You've got to have like some way of doing content security policy and cross-site request forgery protection, and like all of the millions of things that go into like building a production application. And it does all that in a way that gives you like conventions about where you put files. So we use file system based routing, which means that if you're looking to find the code that powers a particular route, then it's really easy to find. Like you're not spelunking through the code trying to find where stuff is. So it gives you the configuration and the convention and the tools to build an application in like a very straightforward way. Like it just like vastly reduces the amount of work that you have to do to ship a production application.
Yeah. When I started using Next that has this convention over configuration, I wasn't really sure about it. But once I started working on it, it really solves a lot of time. Like you really, with client-side applications or with frameworks that doesn't have this convention, you spend a lot of time like trying to create routes, modify routes, define the patterns for them. It really helps solves you a lot of issues.
Yeah.
And Max Calc says, "What's rollup in simple words? I'm new at programming."
So if you're writing an application or a library, like typically you're not going to do everything in a single file, because like once a file grows larger than a certain size, like let's say 100 lines of code, it becomes a little bit harder to work with, particularly if you have multiple people working on the same code base, because if you're all working in the same file, then you're likely to have merge conflicts and all that sort of thing. So instead of doing that, we work in separate modules. So like this part of this module here is responsible for one thing. This module over here might import something from this module, but they're separate files. For a long time, browsers didn't have a way of dealing with modules. Like it just wasn't a concept in JavaScript. You just had script tags. And so the way that we shipped applications was you would get all of your modules and you would concatenate them into a big script, and then you would have that script in your browser. And Rollup was by no means the first project to do this, but it was the first project that did this based on standard JavaScript modules. It would allow you to write your code in these separate modules using the ES6 standard module syntax, and then it would concatenate them into a single file, and like handle things like if you have a variable foo defined in this module and a variable foo defined in this module, then they can't both be named the same thing. So as it concatenates them, it will turn this one into foo1 and then this one into foo2 and so on. And so in that way, because you're not loading a whole bunch of separate modules, your code is more compressible and it loads faster, etc., etc., etc. Now, of course, we do have modules. You can use import natively in the browser, and because Rollup is based on standard modules, it's like very easy for it to output code that works with the browser's native module loader. And nowadays, like we have code splitting as well, so it might not be just generating one module. It might be turning your 100 modules into 10 different modules. So you get a balance between loading what you need when you need it and not having to load a gazillion files independently. all of which is to say a module bundler is just like a fancy way of concatenating files. That's all it is.
It's a good oversimplification. Like we are making strings. Like
Yeah,
yeah,
that's all programming is. It's just like gluing strings to each other in increasingly baroque ways.
yeah, tricking our rock to make like fancy things.
Yeah.
I like it. And the more that is this says, it's so hard sometimes to like speak in English but think in Spanish that the words start like mixing.
I mean,
Uh,
you're doing better than I would be.
Number that says Bit delegates to Rollup for some of its functionality. Would you recommend people use Bit or Rollup itself?
It depends what you're doing. If you're building an application, then you should 100% use Vite, because like Rollup is intentionally very kind of bare bones. It's a low level tool. If all you need to do is concatenate some modules, like you're building a library, then Rollup is good at that. It's like a pretty simple tool. You can learn it fairly straightforwardly, and like the input to output is very predictable. But as soon as you start needing to worry about things like compiling TypeScript or dealing with dependencies that you've installed from npm that may not be standard modules, maybe they're common JS modules, or you're building a web app and you want to import some CSS files and have those applied to the document. Because as soon as you start needing those sorts of things, then Vite is incredibly useful. And what it does, which is completely different to Rollup, is it provides a development server. So in development, you're not actually bundling your modules at all. Vite is serving them one at a time, and it's transforming them on demand as needed. So if one of your modules is a TypeScript module and the browser requests that module from the Vite dev server, it will transform it from TypeScript to JavaScript on the fly, and then that gets loaded in the browser. So it's not getting bundled because there's no need, because like the browser
Okay.
has a native module. So because of that, it's able to do really fancy things like hot module reloading, and it's incredibly fast to start up because
Yeah.
it doesn't need to bundle your entire application. It just starts loading the modules as and when they're requested. And so like if you're building an app, then if you were using just Rollup, you would need to add a ton of configuration and it still wouldn't be as good as Vite. So my recommendation is, if you're building an app, use Vite, or like a framework that is built on top of Vite. SvelteKit is a framework that uses Vite under the hood. And there's other frameworks that are also using Vite, like Astro is another one that uses Vite under the hood. And there's a few others, I think Eel and like
Yeah.
Nuxt.
When I started using Vite instead of Create React App for prototyping React applications, the change was like incredible. The first change was, okay, instead of 20 seconds to bootstrap the development server, I had like half a second.
Yeah.
And the fast refresh, like the hot mode replacement, worked really great in Vite when it wasn't working really well in Create React App. And a lot of things. Uh, since then, I migrated, like not migrated, but I started doing all my prototyping or small projects directly in Vite instead of Create React App. I think it's a really good tool, and I use the Rollup for developing some libraries, like small libraries to publish on npm, and I really think it's a good tool. Oh, we had a sub GIF. Thank you, Nutlo. And well, probably you people asked you this question like 100 times, but why do you think, like, why do you created a new framework like Svelte? What you have this answer like with the same words every time, because it's not easy to create a new framework, and it's not easy for people to adopt a new framework, and it has a really good impact in the community. Why?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I was never concerned about adoption, and I don't think anyone else on the Svelte team is really concerned about adoption. Like adoption is nice if it means that people are enjoying using your thing and
Exactly.
that they're recommending it to other people. Like it is a sign that you're doing the right thing. But like targeting adoption specifically is just like the wrong way for any open source project to go. And so like if if we built it and it didn't get much adoption, then like it wouldn't upset us that much. It's just nice to get that validation. The reason that it was created in the first place was well, I've been thinking about front end frameworks for a long time. Like I had a project before Svelte called Reactive, which was kind of like a similar idea. It was a UI framework that was based on templates.
I remember that
And
it was created at same time as React, and the
right, yeah,
name, yeah.
yeah. I distinctly remember when React was launched and I saw it on Hacker News, and I was just like a couple of weeks away from being able to do the first release of Reactive. I was like, oh fuck, there's no point now. But like I kept using it because as great as React is, it's not like it's just a matter of taste. Like not everyone wants to use React. For some people, the React mental model just doesn't click. And particularly like in the place where I've been spent most of my career, which is newsrooms. Like I've been generally working with people who aren't like they don't care about JavaScript fads. Right? They just want to write some code, and being able to do so in a way that is familiar if you know HTML and CSS, without having to think about like, oh, so we need to configure Babel to do our JSX or whatever. Like it's just not appealing. And what I found is that people who do have that background have taken to Svelte much more quickly than they take to things like React. Um, and so that's part of it is to have an alternative to React so that we have a little bit more diversity in the ecosystem, and like people aren't just forced into using React because it's the one true way. But there are other tangible things that we got out of having a different framework. Because I've spent most of my time working in news, doing like interactive graphics, which are heavily data driven, or they've got a lot of interactivity and things like that. And like you're putting these things on an article page where there's already a bunch of other stuff. Like your performance budget is pretty tight, and candidly, React is not very well suited to solving that problem. Like React is fine if you're building a certain type of app, but if you need really high performance when you're changing state, for example, if you're doing animations at 60 frames per second, like React just isn't great for that. And if you're trying to ship a very small amount of JavaScript because the rest of your page is already too big, then like again, React is not great for that. Like React DOM is over 100 kilobytes, last I checked. Uh, so for those reasons, the performance and the bundle size, coupled with the developer experience of being able to write in a way that feels more like with the grain of the web platform, that those are the reasons that Svelte was started. And we open sourced it, and it turns out that like most people are perfectly happy with React, but for the people who aren't, like it's nice that there is an alternative that they can use.
Yeah, I'm really happy with React, but I really think that Svelte and other frameworks has a lot of features that are really nice for different cases. Like I really like React for most cases, but for prototyping, I think Svelte has a really good toolkit to work with. I mean, the readables, writables, the reactive values, the computed I call them computer properties. Sorry about not using the correct names for things. And like the syntax of Svelte in a lot of cases is for me faster and better to do some applications. I mean, doing a form with Svelte is really faster than doing it with plain React, with the helpers for prevent default or updating state. I mean, I really love React, but I think Svelte is really better for some cases. And what are the things that you think are better in Svelte than in other frameworks? Like, for example, updating state, managing architecturing large applications. What are they, like, let's say, three things you think Svelte is better?
Styles. So this is a kind of a bugbear of mine, is that we have all of these frameworks, all of these JavaScript frameworks, but we're not building JavaScript apps. We're building web apps,
Yeah.
and web apps need styles, and all of the JavaScript frameworks, which I'm including like React and Solid, and like there's a whole bunch of them, but they're all like they all leave styles as an exercise to the reader.
Yep.
And it's not that we don't have solutions; we have too many solutions.
Yeah.
Um, but like if you're starting out, or like if you don't want to spend time researching all of the different trade-offs of the various community solutions, then you're kind of stuck. Svelte and Vue and a handful of other frameworks, they actually treat styles as part of the framework's remit. So when you write a Svelte component, Svelte is essentially as a language, it is a superset of HTML, and an HTML document can include a script tag and it can include a style tag, and you can write your styles directly inside the style tag, and the compiler will match up the selectors with the markup that you've written, and it will say, okay, these are the styles that are being used in this component, and it will scope them so that your styles don't leak out into the document.
That's awesome.
And it will tell you if you have any unused styles as well. So you don't have the kind of the append only style sheet problem where there's a global.css file somewhere and people just keep adding to it because everyone's terrified that if you delete some code, then like you don't know what's going to happen. I think that just dealing with actual CSS in a without any CSS and JS lost in translation stuff, for me that is a much nicer experience. I know that some people like really value I don't know,
Yeah, we don't care other
CSS in
people.
TypeScript, but like but for me that is just a huge advantage because I just don't need to think about it. It just takes it off the list of things that I need to worry about. What else? So the performance is like something that we touched on briefly already, but because Svelte is doing as much of the work at compile time as possible, and it's like identifying the parts of your component that are never going to change. It's able to make these like fairly surgical updates to the DOM when you have state changes. So it's very able to handle 60 frames per second animation with like much larger deltas than for example React. Right? Because React has this virtual DOM mechanism where it's kind of re-rendering the world or a part of the world whenever your state changes, and that includes all of the static parts of your app, and it means that it's rerunning like all of your hooks,
Yep.
like regenerating all of your like temporary arrays and inline functions and all of that stuff. Each one of which by itself is fine. Like there's it's not something that like you're not going to get penalized for creating an extra array on every frame, but over time, like over the size of an entire application, all of this stuff really adds up.
Yep.
And the outcome is that like even the React core team will sometimes say things like, yeah, React isn't really great for 60 frames per second animation, and so you have to do these workarounds like getting refs to elements and then doing the imperative DOM
Yeah.
manipulation thing, and it's like, come on, like this is the framework's job, and it's not doing that job. So that would be the second thing on the list.
Yeah, and performance is really important if you need those 60 frames per second, and also allows you to do a lot of cool things. Uh, uh, we will go to a third thing, but I think Svelte Cube, it's awesome. Like I really like it. Svelte Cube.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I've neglected that a little bit since I launched it. There's a bunch of pull requests on that repo, and I really need to get to it. But that is something for next week. So the third thing is that because we're not trying to express user interface concept in a language, namely JavaScript, which is fundamentally ill-designed for user interface. Because like it by its very nature, like JavaScript is an imperative language. It's this event-driven imperative language, and when you're expressing user interfaces, you want to do so declaratively. And like trying to force a declarative mindset in this imperative world, you end up doing some, like, frankly, some weird shit. And Svelte is, because it's a compiler, like, we have control over what the authoring experience is like. And so the authoring experience is, it's a lot more designed than it is in other frameworks because we just don't have the same constraints. And the consequence of that is that you're generally able to write much less code when you're using Svelte than when you're using other frameworks. So, like, for example, if we translate a typical React component into its Svelte equivalent, you're usually writing about 40% less code, which is pretty substantial, 30 to 40% less
It's a
code.
lot.
Yeah, and the thesis that I have, there's some science around this. There's, like, we need to have more studies. But what I have been able to find in the literature suggests that the amount of code in your code base is very strongly correlated with the number of bugs in your code base, and the
Makes
relationship
sense.
is actually
Yeah.
super linear. What we found was that like, if you have 100 lines of code and 1,000 lines of code, like, the 1,000 lines of code will have more than 10 times the number of bugs than the 100 lines of code. Right? It's a super linear relationship. And so if you can use a way of writing your application that is like, results in you writing much less code, then you're going to have fewer
Less
bugs.
bad. Yeah.
Right? It just stands to reason.
Maths.
Yeah. So those are the three things. Like, it is actually a web app framework instead of a JavaScript framework. It will enable you to do high performance stuff without having to spend a lot of time hand optimizing your DOM code, and you're going to be able to write less code, which is going to make your application less buggy.
Yeah, I really think Svelte is awesome. I had some problems, like, trying to go from the React mindset to the Svelte mindset, going through the get started like tutorial. And there's some things that I still find hard, like, not hard, but trying to get my head around. Like this example of I have a variable that it's an array, and I have to add one value to it. And I see, like, in a lot of cases, when you are using primitives in your variables, like strings or numbers or whatever, you say, okay, I will just mutate this value. And in other cases, you say, hey, I have this array, and I can't push to mutate or or splice this array because I have to reassign the value after mutating it to really update that value on the.
Yeah, so people bring this up a lot, but have you tried pushing to an array inside React?
No, yeah, of course. No, you can't.
Right. It just doesn't work at all, because in order for, like, if you're using set state, like, if you do array.push value and then you do, like, set array,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't do anything, because it does, like, an equality, like a referential equality comparison. And because you've mutated it, you haven't created a new array, that set state will do nothing.
Exactly.
Right? So Svelte is the same, because like, by default, like, you do need to, sorry, it's not the same. What I'm
It's
saying is,
same but different. Like, yeah.
It's the same in that if you do like array equals ... array comma new value, like, that will work, because
You need to assign.
like, you're assigning to the left hand side. But if you are mutating it, then there's this little bit of friction. Like, we need to tell the compiler, oh, by the way, this changed, this has been invalidated, and we might need to do a re-render here. So you do need to do this array equals array. And the reason that we kind of left that in and didn't try and come up with a better solution is because it sort of subtly guides you towards treating your data as immutable. Like, it sort of forces you to make a shallow copy and do that. But it does give you this escape hatch. Like if you do want to mutate stuff because it's going to be, a better use of memory and you're not worried about mutation bugs, then you can do that in Svelte and you cannot do that in React.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so it is a thing that people bring up a lot because it is like a bit of a weird thing. It's like an abstraction leak, but yeah,
Yeah, I think it's really cool, but probably I got it messed up because I thought, hey, if this is not okay, why it's on the documentation? Like, is this correct? If
right.
it's correct, great. I think it's awesome because I really use it sometimes. In the Wordle example, I had an array of arrays, right? And I mutated one um, element inside the array of array, and I got it correctly on screen, right? But then when I tried to do it on the original array to reset the state, I couldn't. I had to do the reassign thing. And when I went to the documentation and say, hey, you can mutate it, but then you have to reassign it, and it explains correctly, hey, the rule of thumb is you have to have on the left side the element that you are updating. And that makes sense. Like I think it's really good. It was weird to have it on the documentation. I mean, also it's because I come from React, right, where you can't mutate the state. Like if you mutate the state, someone will fire you or something. Uh, but I think having the opportunity to do it, it's really cool. Oh man. Um, Oh, well, let's go to other questions. In SvelteKit, why did you decide to use Vite?
Um, because it's like very closely aligned with how we think about um like what a build tool needs to do in this day and age. We started out with something different. We started out with a thing called Snowpack, which came from the team that is now the Astro Technology Company. They built Snowpack way back when, and it was really the first major version of this idea of an unbundled dev server. So before I was talking about how you have this development server running in the background and the browser requests like a specific module. And if it happens to be TypeScript, the dev server will turn it into JavaScript and send it back, but it won't bundle your entire application. Snowpack was the first thing that did that. And SvelteKit for a long time was built on top of Snowpack. What we found though was that we were having to do a huge amount of work on top of Snowpack, particularly to implement things like server-side rendering, because Snowpack was trying to be this very agnostic tool and not like have built-in answers to how you do server-side rendering. And when Vite version 2 came out, it had started thinking about server-side rendering, and it had basically taken some very similar approaches that we had taken inside SvelteKit, even to the extent of actually using some of our code for the server-side module loading. And as we looked at the documentation, it was just very clear that philosophically there was a much closer alignment. Snowpack was like a kind of a very agnostic low-level thing. Vite, on the other hand, was built for the specific purpose of enabling uses like SvelteKit. And if I'm totally honest, like no disrespect to the Snowpack team, but Vite was just a better maintained project.
It's awesome.
We weren't hitting the same kinds of bugs that we were with Snowpack, and so it wasn't an easy decision by any stretch. We owed the Snowpack team a huge debt of gratitude, but Vite is just so good, and the fact that it has so many people working on it from different frameworks, like there's us and Astro themselves, they switched away from their own thing to using Vite, which is just testament to how good Vite is. They just announced that they have a full-time developer, Patak, who is well known in the Svelte community as well. And it's just got such a bright future. Even though it's not like quite as buzzwordy as some other things, like it's not built in Rust or anything like that. It's just like built out of other found
Uninstalling.
parts. Like
Yeah.
it's got some ES build over here and it's got some Rollup over here. Like these are two separate module bundlers. Like and it's using both of them. Like it seems
You can
crazy,
do that. Yeah.
but it's actually just like incredibly well designed. And I've been able to use Vite outside SvelteKit. I've been able to use Vite for some incredibly weird things. Like at the New York Times, um, we were as I was leaving, we'd been in the process of building an update to the graphics publishing workflow that used Vite to do some incredibly strange things that no one else would have a need to do, but they were specific to our use case. And because Vite is like this very sort of well designed but hackable surface, you can do that. And because of that, like I just have a very high level of confidence that we're going to be able to solve whatever problems we need to solve on top of that platform.
Awesome. It's I think Vite is awesome. Francisco de UI says, I heard that Vercel wants to change Next to be framework agnostic. I just heard this. Are you in the company to achieve that?
I have not heard that particular rumor. No, I think Next is going to continue being Next. Like Next is just this incredible success story. The adoption of Next has been going like that over the years, and um, it's like the very rare open source project that hasn't suffered from like increased adoption turning into decreased satisfaction. Um, and Vercel has
That's
hired
right.
people like Tobias, and the creator of SWC as well is working at Vercel now,
It's
um,
incredible.
which is like so like all of the as good as Next already is, it's gonna be incredible in the months to come because of the like just the sheer engineering firepower that's been directed at it. Vercel, however, is I think looking to be more framework agnostic. So the idea is that whatever your preference is, there are some people who don't want to use Next for whatever reasons. Um, whatever technology you're using, you should be able to deploy your app on Vercel and get like the best possible experience for your users. And part of that is sponsoring the development of competing frameworks directly. So they sponsor SvelteKit by employing me, but they also sponsor Astro, for example. Last I checked, and possibly also Nuxt, although maybe I'm speaking out of turn. So yeah, Vercel, the company, wants to be thought of as much more than a place to deploy your next app. It is a place to deploy your next app, but it's going to be a lot more than that, or is a lot more than that, but it's going to be
Yeah.
seen as a lot more than that. But Next is going to carry on being like the React server-side framework. And yeah, SvelteKit will be Next, but for Svelte.
Yeah. Every time I see someone on Twitter that says I quitted my job, I think this will be our new coworker. Vercel is hiring like everyone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the
It's
people.
wild. Like when I joined a few months ago, I was employee like I don't know 130, 140 or so, and we're now up to like 240 employees. Like I'm already uh, like I've been there longer than almost half of the company, which is just
Yeah, I
just
think
bananas.
I joined it before being 100. Like, uh, it's incredible, and I joined it on September, August, I think. It's incredible, and the first time I went to Slack, like the first time, I saw like the people working at Vercel that I didn't know that they were in there. And say, I can't believe I'm working with like these people. And
Hmm.
I think it's a really really awesome place.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. There's some incredible talent at the company, and
yeah,
I think like so. Were you in the EPD all hands last week when there were some of the internal demos being shown? Like I just wanted to like share some of that stuff with the outside world because it's just crazy.
yeah, it's one of the best things about the company when you see these internal demos by awesome people and say, "Hey, but I just created like a hello world example, and these guys are doing these things." It's incredible, and also everyone is really nice. Like you have any question, you can ping anyone, and they will be ready. for answering whatever question you have.
Yeah.
I really love that. Nico Mendes says, what resources would you recommend for learning SvelteKit? I feel like the official docs are excellent, but I'm still struggling to make my components more reusable.
Yeah. So the SvelteKit documentation is kind of placeholder, if I'm totally honest. What we want is to have a tutorial for SvelteKit similar to the one that we have for Svelte itself. And that's really hard to do because SvelteKit is, it's a node framework. And we have some ideas. We're not ready to talk about them publicly yet, but the idea is that by the time SvelteKit is a 1.0, we're going to have some really good documentation, which is going to make it much easier to sort of get your footing. There's also like people are making a bunch of courses around it. There's I saw the other day there's a like I think it's everythingsvelte.com. Yeah, that's right, is coming in spring, I guess. Steph Dietz, who is our co-worker at Vercel, is working on some training material for SvelteKit as well. And I think there's probably one or two other courses that are in the works. They slip my mind right now, but
it's really new. So
there's not going to be a shortage of documentation eventually, but for right now, like if you have questions, and it might be just a case of hanging around in the Svelte Discord and asking people, which is good to do anyway, because like if you run into problems, then it might be things that we haven't, like they're pain points that we're not aware of, and raising your voice now is a good way to make sure that they're considered ahead of the stable release, after which point it becomes harder to make changes.
awesome. Yeah, I every time I will share my screen. Like, I really like this. We will have like, I don't know, an entire stream of using SvelteKit. I really love it. I remember when you shared this the first time, like it was secret. Not secret, it was already deployed, but don't share this link. I was like, I will share this. But I don't want to get fired. No, we will do like an entire stream about it. I think 3JS it's really hard to use in plain JavaScript, or it's not. It's not. Well, yes, it's hard to use, but it's not declarative, right? And this brings a lot of things to the table that are really nice to develop in this kind of applications.
Yeah, I liken it to the DOM. Like that when you're dealing with three objects, it's like you're dealing with document.createElement and document.querySelector. Like you can do it, you can build applications that way, but you're probably gonna like
it's a mess.
Run up against the complexity wall.
Yeah.
And so like the reason for having something like Svelte Qubit is exactly the same reason for having Svelte or React or Vue themselves. Like if you can build things with components, then you just don't run into the complexity wall like as soon, essentially.
Great. Manu Shay 90 says, what was a complicated challenge while creating Svelte? Besides everything.
Yeah, it's a difficult code base to work on because like you're writing code that writes code. Like that's essentially what a compiler is you're writing code that writes code. And it's just like there's just like a lot of like edge cases that you need to think about, and you just I don't know, you need to like keep a lot of stuff in your head as you're working in the code base, and I've always found that a bit of a struggle.
And how that affects like open source contributors if it's a really hard like code base?
Yeah, I mean, it means that the people who contribute tend to be people who've like really dedicated themselves to understanding what's going on, and I'm so grateful to the people who do that, because like getting high quality contributions on any open source project is difficult, but on a project that is hard to understand in the first place, it's even harder. And so the people that have done it have my undying gratitude.
Excellent. Eman Garay says, how will your incorporation into Vercel impact the future of SvelteKit?
I'm only in good ways. The company and also the Svelte team have been very clear the whole time that like in terms of how the project is run, like our governance, nothing is really changing. Like the sort of the agenda of the project is, I guess, well, the main mechanism that we have is like once a month, the maintainers will have a 3 hour video chat and we'll talk through like the most important pull requests and issues and RFCs and whatnot. And that hasn't changed. So the cell doesn't have like a say in what features we develop. It's really just I now have time to actually work on the damn thing, and before I didn't. and that has changed how quickly we're able to respond to issues, particularly on SvelteKit. But B, as someone who works at Svelte, I now have I'm now part of this machine that has much greater visibility into what issues people are actually encountering in the real world. Like in the Svelte Slack channel on the Svelte Slack, I'll frequently get pinged when the customer success managers who interface directly with the Svelte customers say, "Oh, this person's having an issue with SvelteKit. Can you help?" And so through that, like I've been able to
With a
find
lot of
out what
feedback.
issues
Yeah.
people are running into. And then finally, like just because of the way that Guillermo is, like he is the just like the ultimate perfectionist and will look at things and be like, this is great, but A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and I need fixing. And like he will just like identify these things that just kind of escaped everyone else's notice.
I
And
don't know
so
how he does it. Like he's
yeah, I mean he's
everywhere, every time, and has a lot of context about every issue. I really don't know how.
so much context and just like incredible attention to detail. So like just like being subject to to the eye of Guillermo, I think is also beneficial to the project. So those are the ways that me being at Vercel affects Svelte. It's all good ways, and it's not going to like sway the direction that it takes. Like we're not going to make it impossible to deploy apps anywhere rather than Vercel or anything like that. It's just not in anyone's interest.
I have a theory that there's at least three Guillermos, like in Slack, in
Yeah.
different time zones, and that has different contexts. But I don't have like evidence to my theory. Rich, well, this sounds like an interview question, but Rich, where do you imagine yourself in 10 years from now?
I don't know, in the woods somewhere. I maybe open a B&B, something like that. I don't know.
Uh,
I honestly have no idea.
in some channels, I saw like some really good images from like beaches and places. I really envy those people from the company that are on those magic
Yeah.
places.
Yeah, it's been a while since I did any serious traveling, like mostly because of COVID and everything. But um, I I would like my future to involve lots of foreign countries and different cuisine and maybe not so much screen time. That'd be
And
nice.
have you traveled a lot before COVID?
Here and there, not so much since I've been living in the States, funnily enough. But yeah, I used to very much enjoy travel,
Uh,
and
and which
um,
countries or which landscapes are your favorite? Like, you prefer beach? You prefer cold weathers?
I'm more of a mountains guy than a beach guy. Um, but I will come to the beach and I will enjoy it.
Of course. And what's like the best place you went for a vacation? If
Oh,
it's too
that is
hard,
a
you can pick
Whew.
two or three.
um So I spent a good chunk of time in New Zealand back in the day, and
Nice.
that is a phenomenal part of the world. I've actually yet to visit any part of Latin America, but um, Argentina has long been near the top. Argentina and Chile have long been near the top of my wish list. Um,
Well, because you like mountains, because you are like one
because
hour and a
yeah,
half away from like the Caribbean Sea, like
yeah,
Cuba or
hmm
Venezuela. But
yeah,
yeah, if you like mountains, we have Bariloche in here that it's like a really awesome place for people that really likes mountains. Uh,
yeah,
or San Martin de los Andes also here. Uh, really nice places. Of course, well, if you are around here, we can take a coffee or something.
yeah.
Uh, Brief Rose D says, what projection is there in Svelte for? When does it come out? Something about the roadmap? Okay.
uh, so I'm definitely not going to get drawn on a release date, and I better than to answer that question.
Yeah.
Um,
Excellent.
the kinds of things that we're thinking about are um, the compiler output. We think we can make the compiler output smaller and faster. We think that we can improve how element transitions work. Like I think it would be really good to unify transitions and animations such that it's easier to do like really kind of nice transitions between different layouts and that sort of thing. Um, there are some changes that we have in mind about how stores work that would make them potentially a bit more flexible and refactorable. Uh, I have a list somewhere of the things that we want to do, but it was not intended for public consumption because as soon as I start like suggesting things that we might do, all of a sudden we're sort of beholden to them. Like a while back, I was talking to Lee Robinson in a video like this one, and I just kind of, as an aside, said, "Oh, what if we rewrote the compiler in Rust? It seems to be the in thing these days." And the next thing I know, there's a blog post saying that the Svelte team is going to rewrite the compiler in Rust. And I'm like, no,
Everyone takes
abort,
everything
abort.
out of context. Yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome. Yeah, it's really hard to. I, I I know that most of the things we do in Brazil, we can't talk about them. So every time I have a stream and someone asks something about Brazil, it's like, I don't know if I can answer that, but
yeah,
I won't. Just
yeah.
to be sure.
Just to be safe.
Yeah. Look, I have opened like images of the nice mountain places that
Mm,
we have here. We have San Martin de los Andes. Look, these places, man. I have never
yeah, that's
been
nice.
in San Martin de los Andes. I have been in Bariloche. Bariloche, really nice place.
Hmm.
If you like snow, I don't know why there is no snow in the Bariloche pictures. Like, it's one of the most beautiful things they have. El
That looks great.
Chaltén, yeah, nice place. Okay, back to the code. Mickey Robles says, "What's the coolest Svelte app that you have said?"
Okay, so I am very biased here. Um, but if how can I get this to you? There is
If you send me a link and it's a read roll link, I will lose my mind. Like in here, you have a chat here in the OBS Nisha. So if you want to send a
oh
link,
yeah.
or if
Okay, so I just sent a link to a tweet.
yeah, let's see
Um,
screen. Ah, nice. I saw it today.
right. So I'm very biased because I helped build the first version of this for the Tokyo Olympics last summer. This video inside this tweet is being rendered by a SvelteKit app, and the animation that you see is created with Svelte Cubed. Um, and so I left the New York Times a few months ago, and one of my greatest regrets that I wasn't going to be able to work on the Winter Olympics coverage. And so I saw these come out this week, and I was like, oh my god, they did it! and I was just like so like overcome with emotion because they did such a phenomenal job. Like look at this little guy. There's
It's
like
awesome.
there's just the amount of detail in this is staggering. Like there's a little reflection and
The
there's a ripple
animation,
when it
yeah,
lands.
it's 60
Um,
FPS, right?
yeah, and like how the points are like appear where he lands and
Yeah,
yeah, just like really nicely done. And I kind of highlight this one partly because of my emotional attachment to it, but also because like I think it kind of showcases um, the sort of scenario in which Svelte adds a lot of value. Because this, like anytime you're doing something inside a newsroom, you're up against some pretty harsh deadlines. And particularly if you're working on Olympics coverage, like it's not like you can be late.
yeah,
You know,
it's just today, it's
the
now,
event's
right?
happening, and like you got to get everything ready, and you got to solve a ton of really complex problems to be able to produce a video like this within like a couple of minutes after the event has actually happened. Um, and they managed to do that. So I think this is a pretty good showcase uh,
I love
of
the
what the
animation,
framework's
like
good at.
how fluid the animation is, like the arms, like yeah, it has a lot of detail. It
Yeah.
has a lot of detail. Um, D'Angelo, D'Angelo Medina Chi says, when using Svelte and SvelteKit, it feels like some kind of magic like no other. It feels so simple at first. How will you not lose that simplicity of the framework when everything starts to grow and be more demanding?
uh, I I think it comes down to just like being kind of militant about not adding new features unless they're absolutely required. And this is something that, you know, for me personally, it took a long time to get into the habit of saying no to stuff. And a lot of people, when they first start working in open source, are like, very keen to say yes to feature requests because like you want to please people who are like you're very like flattered by the attention of people using your project and you want to please the like your audience. And so when I was a more junior open source developer, I added all sorts of features to stuff, and the result is that even if each of those features makes sense in isolation, over time it ends up with a piece of software that just lacks a certain quality of cohesiveness. And it's hard to see until you've kind of experienced it a few times. And I feel like I've been doing this long enough. I've got enough scars that I am very quick to say no. We don't want to have this feature, even though like it doesn't seem like there are any downsides to adding this feature, and even though it's going to unblock your use case, like this is something that is probably going to cause us regret down the line. And I think like anyone who frequents the Svelte repos and has like seen me close a pull request without merging knows that like I take that responsibility very seriously um, because it's absolutely right. Like the normally what happens with these projects is they do just kind of collapse under their own weight, and the whole point of Salt existing is for it to be simple and for it to feel like you're like you've got a bit of a kind of a cheat code when you're building stuff, and I don't want to lose that.
Yeah, and it's really hard when you really like or you really want a feature, but you know it's not a fit for the project. Like
Yeah.
you have to fight with yourself. Yeah, I really like this. I really want this to be in here, but I know it's not good for the project. Uh, it should be
Yeah.
really hard. Like it's not the same thing for like in my case, I created an application that was using like an e-commerce for several people here in Argentina, and every time I had this issue where people was asking me things, sometimes I say, "Hey, no, this is not aligned with the idea of the product." But sometimes people say, "Hey, it would be really nice to have this," and I say, "Hey, that's a really good idea, and I really liked it, but I know it doesn't align with the product."
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, today I will code this feature. And probably I will code the feature. I will have the open pull request ready to merge. And I say,
Hmm.
no, I shouldn't. And that's
Yeah.
what was one of the hardest part of uh, doing a product. Dan Shalmania says, this is the same question. Um, Nacho says, I really, and I have to translate it. Hats off to Rich and his excellent oratory. Everything he explains, he's doing it really well. And like
Oh,
clap
thank
hands.
you. I appreciate that.
Nico Mendes says, Svelte feels like a more powerful way of writing native HTML and CSS. For new developer, that's great because they don't have to diverge too much on the tooling needed to build apps, because everything you need is already built in.
Yeah, that's one of our design goals, is that if you already know how to write stuff on the web, then you should be able to pick up Svelte very quickly.
Yeah.
Minimize the number of new concepts.
Free Frosty says, Next and SvelteKit are the future of server-side rendering.
Yeah, I hope so.
Also, Frantech Arc says, is he working in Silicon Valley or living?
No, this is my Brooklyn apartment. I live on the East Coast. Vercel is like a fully remote or fully distributed company. So
Have
we,
you
we all
always
we all work from home
have you always been there in New York?
for the last 8 years. Yeah,
And where are you from, like originally?
north of England, York.
I have been there. Nice place.
Yeah,
Uh,
it is.
Shack Freak 22 says, "Is that a video or a video stream, like being rendered in real time, like the New York time graphic thing?"
Oh no, it's actually using FFmpeg. So what the SvelteKit app that I referred to before is this it's an admin page that uh, like allows you to pull in the data from the Olympic data feed, which is this API that the Olympics make available to people with large amounts of money. And the page essentially takes that API data and turns it into the 3D animation. And what we're doing is, or I shouldn't say what the app is doing is going frame by frame, like advancing the frame one at a time. And everything is driven by the frame number. And once it's rendered the frame, it will take a screenshot and then it will write that to a virtual file system that is managed by a build of FFmpeg that runs in the browser. So that some genius compiled FFmpeg to WASM, and you can run it in the browser. And so you write data into its virtual file system, and then you run an FFmpeg command, and it will generate a video which you can then pull out of the file system. And
That's a
then
lot of
so
things.
like yeah, I mean there's a lot going on there, and like we need to do like uh, some tricks with cross origin something in order to enable shared array buffers, because FFmpeg WASM needs shared array buffers, and like there's a lot of hoops that you have to jump through. But the upshot is that you have this video file which is rendered at near real time. So you can play the video or you can scrub back and forth in real time, and it takes about like a minute and a half to render a minute of video, say. And then you have this video data that you can see in an HTML5 video tag on the page. And if it looks good, then we hit a button. The data gets posted to Slack. And then the social editors in the Slack channel can see the video and can grab it from there and then plonk it in Twitter. And so that is the workflow. And from the event happening to the video being on Twitter is typically like 3 or 4 minutes. Because like everyone is like furiously like watching the live stream, and as soon as the data is available, it's like go, generate the video, post it to Slack, social editors, get it on Twitter, write a caption, blah.
I imagine like that backstage of people doing all that things, and there's a lot of events like in the winter games. So this is multiplied by like a lot of people, like a lot of events and a lot of participants between every event. Like, there's a lot
Yeah,
of people behind it.
yeah.
Uh,
It's a huge lift, but so much fun.
Nice. I don't know when this message was sent, but it says so Svelte is a rich framework.
I get you can build rich things with Svelte.
I love that jokes, and I do good that jokes in Spanish, but so bad jokes in English. And Dummertag said, is the lack of a very high quality, comprehensive, mature component library like Beautify a barrier to the adoption of Svelte?
Probably, yeah. Yeah,
There's
it's like
none.
it's a so there are component libraries, but the so like Beautify is like the library if you want to use material design in Vue. And I don't know if there is an equivalent in Svelte. I'm not like cards on the table. I'm not completely on top of what's happening in component libraries in Svelte because I tend not to use component libraries. I tend to just like
CSS.
write stuff as and when I need it. Yeah. Um,
Why people like
but
material design like
yeah, yeah, I think there are better design systems in material design, but like whatever. This is the just the classic chicken and egg problem. As a framework grows in popularity, at a certain point, people will start building component design systems for it. Um, and as people start building component design systems, more people will start using the framework. And it's just like one of those things. Like if it needs to happen, it will happen organically eventually. And I'm not concerned about whether or not it's going to happen. In the meantime, yeah, it probably is a barrier to adoption for a lot of people.
and says, what's the shakanori? Oh man, I don't know
The
this word.
Jackanory, it's a rhyming slang.
Yeah.
What's the story?
Okay, with web components, they seem to have been studiously ignored by most of the popular JS frameworks.
Yeah, it's because they're not very good.
Well, that's a good question. A good answer,
Uh,
but specific
okay, so
answer.
web components. Where to begin? So the as a as a means of authoring interactive components, web components are awful. You basically need to use a framework in order to generate web components beyond a certain level of complexity. Um, and so at that point, like you may as well just use any framework. People like to talk about how web components are great for interoperability and stuff, but I saw a really good example just this week of why that's actually not the case at all. So context, you can't use web components without JavaScript, right? Because the markup doesn't contain the shadow DOM until you register the custom element in the page. And at that point, like you have a sort of a flash of unstyled content. So the powers that be came up with something called Declarative Shadow Dom, which allows you to embed a representation of the Shadow DOM on the page when it gets first loaded in the browser, and then that gets hydrated. There are some huge problems with Declarative Shadow DOM and how it works, but what I saw this week was an example of a plugin for 11ty that allows you to use Declarative Shadow DOM with your lit custom elements. But it only works with lit custom elements. It doesn't work with any other kind of custom element. So like all of these, the like the web component people talk this very high game about interoperability and like using the platform and everything. But what we've ultimately got is a system that uses a global namespace that doesn't like you can't deal with conflicts. It forces you to load CSS in either a way that is only supported in one browser and other browsers have not yet expressed much of an interest in implementing, or you can do it in a way that is bad for performance. If you want to have web components that work on pages without JavaScript, then you have to do some really ridiculous hacks that enable declarative shadow DOM, which if you're doing dynamic server rendering will slow your page right down to a crawl. And even if you're not using server rendering, like if you're doing things ahead of time, then you're probably not going to be able to use vanilla web components. You're probably going to have to use some frameworks proprietary implementation of custom elements. And on top of that, like you've got accessibility problems with them that are very well documented. You can't use them inside SVG elements. There's just so many caveats around web components, and all of the problems that they solve have basically been solved by frameworks.
Yeah.
So like people always say like the whole point of the web component specifications is so that framework authors can do less work. Like in theory, they are primitives that those of us building frameworks can build on top of. But those of us building frameworks have uniformly said, we're not interested. These don't solve our problems. So sorry, you got me on a little bit of a rant there, but
No,
my
it's
view is
okay.
that web components simply do not solve the problems
No,
that we need them to
I
solve.
think that when web components firstly, oh man, my dogs are stop,
Yeah.
basta, basta, andate para allá, anda para allá. Mayonesa. I have my dog. One of my dogs is called mayonesa con ajo, that it translates to mayonnaise with garlic. So mayonesa, basta. Déjala tranquila, chiquita. Basta. Okay. Yeah, I think that the first time like web components showed up, there weren't so much framework solving this issue. And then I don't know if the development of web components got stuck, but I think it was overpassed by the development of new frameworks that solve those issues.
Yeah, they're basically codifying early 2010 practices of how to build web apps.
Yeah.
And we've learned so much in the decade since then that it just doesn't make sense to have this stuff calcified in the platform itself.
Yeah. Manu Shiny 90 says, what is a thing that, while creating Svelte, was kept in the drawer that we can expect to see soon? If you can reveal it, like people is trying to make you say like secret things.
Um, yeah, let's see. We experimented with an AI powered version of Svelte that would you just type a description of your component and it would write the code for you. That's not
Uh,
true, but I wish it was.
Someone will clip that and will publish that, and you will have an article
Yeah.
saying Svelte will write components for you.
I mean, well, it probably already. I don't know. Maybe GPT-3 can do that. It can write React components. Maybe it can write Svelte components too. I don't know.
uh, Santiago Persico says, do you think that at some point we will need to change the dominant language of the web from JS to something else? People tend to like the buzzword, like saying Rust, to reach the performance of native apps.
Uh, I may. It depends what you mean by native apps. I don't think JavaScript is the bottleneck in most cases. The bottleneck is the browser itself and the DOM. I think once you get to a certain point, um, if you're using something like Rust, then obviously you get much more predictable performance because like you don't have the garbage collector showing up every now and then and like blocking the main thread for half a second because everything is already managed. And so if you're doing something like, I don't know, if you're building a video editor or something, then a language that compiles to WASM is probably going to be a better bet. But yeah, I don't know that JavaScript is as much of a bottleneck as it's commonly perceived to be.
Yeah.
I think if we really want to solve the performance problems of the web, particularly the mobile web, the things that make things less of a buttery smooth experience in mobile web browsers than in mobile apps, then we need an iteration on the very concept of the web browser. I think there's just too
Mm,
much stuff in the web platform, and I don't think that using different languages is going to fix that.
I'm really scared of Chrome once one day saying, "Hey, we are like deprecating the DOM. Like we are using this new thing." Uh,
I wouldn't put it past them.
I don't know. I mean, uh, people know that the DOM is a really big problem for like these kind of things. I mean, we have frameworks have been trying to hack how to work with the DOM to be more performant and to create or do more things. So I think that eventually some web browser will say something like, we will do something else, something new that hasn't been invented yet, and people will lose their minds. Like, we have to
Yeah.
like redo
Yeah,
everything.
I've been guilty of being a little bit despondent about browsers because, the web platform is so complex. There's just so much stuff in there that, if you look at the Chrome bug tracker, there's like, I don't know, last time I checked, there were about 65,000 open issues. What is it now? crbug.com. We've got even the bug tracker is taking forever to load. Okay, so it's still about 65,000 issues. So it's not
55.
going down. Like these are issues on Chromium. Like, what chance does someone who doesn't have 1,000-strong team of developers, which Google does, working on browsers, stand to create something that could compete? And so for a long time, I was a little bit despondent about all of this stuff. But we have the Flow browser project, which seems to be doing some pretty impressive stuff. Is like much faster than Chrome, and it renders most web pages pretty well. There's also the browser company. Have you familiar
I
with?
I heard the browser company, but I haven't like checked it. Let's see. Let's show the screen. This is a web browser.
Yeah,
Okay, it's just a frame with some buttons and toolbars. It's our window to everything on the internet.
yeah. So I mean, is this built on top of Chromium, or is it a new engine? I'm not sure.
No,
And
I
I
don't.
I, I guess my point is that like there is hope. There is hope that at some point someone is gonna um free us
It's
from the
it's
Chrome.
hope or doom. I don't know.
Right.
I'm really scared of something like that. I I'm happy that it might come one day, but we will have to like rewrite the entire internet, right? Uh,
Yeah, maybe.
yeah, that that might be fun. Not for like companies that have to pay for rewriting the entire
It'll
internet.
It's
Yeah,
job security for us.
yeah. Well, we have to create our new shops. Like, we introduce bugs to still have shops. If you are really good at your shop, you will lose your shop eventually.
Yeah.
So don't use Svelte, write more code, create more bugs, stay with your shop. Um, and Santiago Persico says, or maybe compile, because this was the follow up of the previous question that says, or maybe compile JS to WebAssembly or something like that.
Well, I don't think you could compile JS to WebAssembly and get the benefits of using a compile to WASM language. Because like, if you compile JS to WebAssembly, then presumably you've still got to have like a very expensive garbage collector and all that stuff. But I am quite interested in a language that I saw recently called BorrowScript, which is basically so it builds itself as TypeScript with a borrow checker. So when you're writing BorrowScript, and this is like not like a production ready thing yet. It's as far as I can tell, it's like some guy's experiment. Um, you are writing something that closely resembles JavaScript, but it has the ownership semantics of Rust, which I think means that it's memory safe without garbage collection. So I think that there is a future here for those of us who aren't ready to learn Rust, because God knows I'm not. It looks terrifying. To be able to build the parts of the application that need that kind of memory safety to have it. And I think that would be pretty cool.
Right. D'Angelo Medina says, the background of his house. It brings me a very bad memory. I don't want to hear that version 1.0 of Spellkit will never come out.
I know what this is a reference to. It must have been maybe late 2019, I think. I, I promised that there was going to be an update on Sapper, which is SvelteKit's predecessor.
I
So
remember
yeah,
it.
before SvelteKit, there was like a server-side framework for Svelte called Sapper, and it like it was like good for its time, I guess. Like we learned a lot making it, but ultimately, the web evolved in a way that was kind of incompatible with Sapper's direction, and it was going to be too difficult to steer Sapper back in the right direction. Like I remember it worked really well with Now 1.0, which is what the cell was like years ago. And then the company pivoted towards being this serverless platform, and like we just couldn't we, we couldn't deploy Sapper apps on the cell.
Marcel. Yeah.
Yeah. And like things like Cloudflare workers coming out, all of this stuff, like the momentum is moving away from node servers. And most people still are probably running containerized node servers. But there's enough people that are deploying to the Cell and Netlify and like Cloudflare workers and Dino and all of these other things that Sapper was just not fit for purpose. And so at the end of 2019 or the end of 2020, whenever it was, I said Sapper is going to be released. Never. We're not going to release a Sapper 1.0. And some people were justifiably a little bit upset about that, but it was 100% the right decision because SvelteKit is just a much better project than Sapper. Like it's built on top of a much more solid foundation. It's taken advantage of all the things that we've learned in that time. It's been able to steal ideas from other frameworks, and people are using it in production today. And there is like absolutely no chance that we're not going to get to a 1.0. I can't say when it's going to happen. I can't
Yeah.
guarantee that it's going to be like in the next few
Some
weeks,
year.
but we are definitely going to get to a 1.0, and I'm really excited about it because it's shaping up really nicely, I think.
Yeah, I created a Zapper application some years ago that it was connected to the Spotify application, to the Spotify API. Do you remember like MTV, where you have
Uh-huh.
this that you have this it's program. I don't remember how it's called. Like, this show where you have music and you have like a voting ongoing that you can send a text message to vote
Right.
which song should go next, right? Well, I made this application where you log in and you will use the seed endpoint from Spotify to get like 10 similar songs to the one that you are getting. And you have like a WebSocket connection, and people can scan a QR and vote which one will be the next song. So
That's awesome.
that will get some votes. It was stored in the Polka server, I think. I don't quite remember how it was called. And then it will gather the last songs, because to the seed endpoint from Spotify, you can send like IDs of songs, like you send or no songs and it will just get the current one, or you can send a list of, I don't know, 10 songs and it will get similar songs based on the 10 songs that you sent. And the idea was to put this application in bars and clubs, like in the screen, so people can decide which songs will be next.
Yeah.
And well, Supper 1.0 was never released. No, I never. The pandemic started, so most of the clubs closed and bars closed, so it never reached
Yeah.
production. It's in GitHub. It will probably be a good candidate to be migrated to Svelte.
Yeah. It
I will
sounds like an
try.
awesome idea. I love it.
I really liked it. At least I had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah.
But we will try. And Domortag says it's reasonable that web developers should still care about making website work without JS.
Yep. Yep. And I'll explain why. It's not so much working without JS as it is working until JS. It's like everyone is a Node.js user until the JavaScript loads, and hopefully your JavaScript is going to load immediately. But you might be on a really shitty connection, or you might be on the subway. Like I've very frequently had the experience where I am at the station, like other more developed cities don't have this problem, but in New York City, you can only get on the internet when you're at the subway station. As soon as you go like back underground,
Yep.
um, you don't have internet anymore. So you'll start loading, like you'll open Twitter and you'll see a link that you're interested in, and you'll open it and you'll get the first trickle of HTML, and then you'll go into the tunnel and like the rest is gone. I want to be able to read whatever it is. I want to at least be able to see the content, even if I can't interact with it. And if you're building something with the assumption that people are going to be able to use JavaScript, then in many cases, people will end up having a broken website. And they're not going to show up in your analytics because your analytics run with JavaScript.
Yeah.
Like typically speaking, your analytics aren't going to show all of the people who had a broken experience because you were expecting um, everyone to be able to use JavaScript. And there are other cases too, like maybe you're on an untrusted Wi-Fi network, and the network is doing like weird shit with your JavaScript, like stuff is getting blocked or transformed in certain ways. Like this happens all the time, and you might also have to use an old browser. Like maybe some people work in offices where they have to use Internet Explorer for
Yeah.
whatever reason. It's a thing, and
It's
if you're assuming that, like, it's not just that you're assuming that users have JavaScript, it's you're assuming that users have a modern enough browser to run your JavaScript. And if you're using certain JavaScript features, then there will be syntax errors for some portion of your user base, which means that it's just not going to work. And so, yes, I think it is important that stuff works without JavaScript for a whole variety of reasons.
yeah.
But
Here,
like having said that, like so there is like it is a good question because it sounds like we're asking people to do extra work when we say that a website should work with or without JavaScript. That sounds like you're sort of building the same thing twice. But the whole thing, like the whole idea of frameworks like SvelteKit and Next and Remix and all these other things, is that you're building it in such a way that it shouldn't matter whether there's JavaScript. That JavaScript will progressively enhance what is already a usable experience. And so I tend to dislike it when people say like tick off web developers and say bad web developer, you're not doing enough progressive enhancement or whatever. Like it's on the tool makers to make sure that it's easy to do this stuff, and that's
yeah,
why we spend so much time on it.
yeah, here in Argentina, we have some pages from the government that has to run on Internet Explorer, otherwise they won't work. Like you have a lot of computers that from like places, I don't know how they are called, like people that works with these specific pages from the government that has computer like all computers specifically for this, and they don't use it just for that. They use it
Mhm.
for a lot of things. So all these webs needs to run on an old browser. And regarding the subway thing, I have been on New York a few times, and it's incredible how like rats in the subway live along with people. Like I have never seen so much rats in my life, like in the
Yeah,
subway of New York. And it's like they are going just around you. They have these small places in the subway that they go in, like 4 or 5 at the same time. I think they have like an entire city behind those walls. Uh,
yeah,
and
they're
if
they're everywhere.
Yeah, and if you at night when the garbage starts like piling up in the street, if
Yeah,
you go near them, they will run everywhere.
yeah,
Uh, and people from there, like tourists sees a rat and they start like screaming or running. But people in there, it's like, hey, it's your turn. You can pass, and then I will go. I don't know.
yeah. Hey,
Uh,
look, it's their city too.
it's a strange city, but it's really nice too. Uh, Also, I saw like a lot of. I don't want to say like strange people that, but that has different um, features in them. In how it's called the Central Park, there's people
Mhm.
that like it's not a magician, but they teach like those birds how are they called? Like the birds that are everywhere. So it's not
Pigeons.
dogs, pigeons.
Pigeons. Yeah.
They teach pigeons to do things like get that garbage from there and put it in the bin.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. There's a lot of
Pigeons are super smart animals. They're,
well, I just
pigeons.
I just realized it in there. And well, I don't know. New York, it's an awesome, strange place in the world.
It has its charms. Yeah.
Um, MN Garay says that same background also has good memories. For example, it was where the talk about transitional apps was made. If you haven't seen it, I totally recommend it.
Thank you. Yes, this is where it happened.
Sirius Peppa says, Hi Rich, what is your view on the use of technology in education? Do you think Svelte can be a good fit for creating interactive learning experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't see why not. I think that I think it's really important that that school kids nowadays like have some awareness of what programming looks like. Like I don't think that everyone needs to know how to code. I don't think that everyone needs to be a JavaScript developer, but I think it's really healthy if there's a sort of basic literacy of this is how websites work and this is how computers work. And in order to make that approachable, I think you probably do need um, like abstractions like UI frameworks. Um, and so yeah, I've heard of people using Svelte in an educational context, similarly with other frameworks, and I think it just makes the like your first interaction with web development maybe a little bit less heartbreaking than it otherwise would be.
Excellent. Well, we will have our last question before finishing. It's Naki says, Rich, what's your take on remix?
What is my take on Remix? Um, I think it has some good ideas. I think it has some ideas that aren't quite as original as it makes out. Like it does a lot of things that have been possible in frameworks for a long time. I think the main thing that it's done for the web development community is it talks about the importance of using web standards and using like progressive enhancement and things like that, which have always been possible with other frameworks, but it hasn't been sort of part of the messaging of the framework. And the creators of the framework have done a pretty good job of explaining to people why it's important to do this stuff. The framework itself, clearly it's pretty well engineered and people are having a great time using it. I worry a little bit on their behalf that there isn't a particularly deep moat. Like a lot of the features are things that can easily be stolen by other frameworks. So I'm glad it exists because those ideas are going to percolate into the rest of the community. And like case in point, SvelteKit has already stolen a couple of its ideas and will probably steal a couple more. But I wouldn't necessarily predict the death of Next.js or anything like that just yet. I think there's room for all of these things to coexist and learn from each other.
Clip saying, Rich, Next.js will be dead in the next few months.
Yeah.
Uh, Awesome. Rich, first of all, thank you for being here and answering all these questions. Second thing, I already sent you the care package with
Yeah.
some golosinas with some candies from here from Argentina. It doesn't have like all the golosinas that you can have from here, but the idea of the care packages is that you try like a variety of things and you send me a message saying, "Hey, I like this one, and I didn't like this one." So then I will send a second care packages, like trying to get in the things you like. I didn't ask you if you tried mate.
I think I have. I think I have some time ago. I think I liked it.
Yeah. Well,
I can't remember.
Yeah. Then I will send Mate kit in the second care package. It's like this ugly tea from people in Argentina.
You're
And
basically an ambassador for the country.
yeah, exactly. I'm an ambassador of the candies of the country.
I love it.
Uh, so, Rich, thank you. In a minute, we will switch to Spanish to do some raffles in here. So, thank you for being here. It
Yeah,
was
thank you.
awesome, and I will contact you in the next few days to see how this care package went.
Fantastic. Thank you. This has been fun. Bye, everyone.